gay couple who have been with us since this thing started in Virginia, and we're actually going to have as the guest speaker their son, which is terrific.
Palestinian tradition and not give too long an introductory speech, but I'll do my best to summarize a few things quickly. Tripp, I guess you might say, is either a pretty multi-dimensional guy or a bit schizophrenic, because he could pretty readily be billed as a human rights and environmental activist, an extreme whitewater kayaker, a filmmaker, and an explorer. He does a lot of work exploring around the globe with National Geographic Adventure and other outfits. Today he's here to talk to us after 3 months in Palestine with the International Solidarity Movement, which is a group, well, I'll let Tripp explain that because he'll do it more articulately than I will, but their basic mission is to see that, to try to implement international law in what goes on over there. He'll explain that more eloquently than I do. But I know he's been in many villages around the West Bank and East Jerusalem. He's been in touch with the local resistance coordinating committees on the ground, and so he's got an extremely broad view of what's happening there from many villages, many people, Palestinians and internationals. So it's quite a unique perspective that he brings. And just by way of brief background, in his regular life he's got a background of social and environmental activism. He formed his company, the Epicosity Project, back when he was in college at the University of Oregon, to do extreme whitewater kayaking videos, but tried to make those have content that makes people aware of the environmental problems in the rivers that they kayak. And he and his crew have gradually expanded that to take in all sorts of other dimensions. But in the process, they've discovered and kayaked the underground source of the Pandy River in Papua New Guinea. Under a grant from National Geographic, they've taken the first scientific instruments down wild sections of the Congo and the Mekong rivers to chart fish migrations in hopes of stopping dams and such things. He's traveled to Bolivia to work with a glaciologist on climate change. They've produced video documentaries against wilderness clear-cutting in the western U.S. and to stop mining operations in British Columbia in the Flathead River Basin, and just declared victory because British Columbia just banned all mining operations in that wilderness area. So a great victory that he helped contribute to. He's now putting together an expedition to the Congo to try to work against elephant ivory poaching. And he's also a frequent speaker on tour with National Geographic Adventure and Banff Mountain Film Festival World Tour. So I'll read one brief little thing from a magazine. He was named Best Explorer Now by Canoe and Kayak magazine, and they summed up his vision and his drive for what he does very well, I thought. When Tripp started his Rivers in Demand project, the whole industry shifted toward information-based expeditions. Kayakers, including myself, are trying to follow Tripp's lead by adding cultural and scientific elements to expeditions in third world countries. When you look at his expeditions in the context of history, those trips will stand out because of the difficulty of the logistics, the freshness of the vision, and the response of the national media. It's impossible to ignore what Tripp is doing. And I hope it's going to be impossible for the world to ignore what Tripp and the ISM folks are doing over in Palestine. And we'll let him tell us the tale of what's happening over there.
I sure hope I can live up to that. Thank you all for inviting me and coming here to see me speak. I have to say that I'm under 48 hours off the plane from Palestine. I got back at 10 o'clock on Thursday night, and this is sort of new material for me to present, and a lot of the emotion emotions and experiences I haven't really fully processed yet. So it's a little bit of a raw presentation in that respect, but you'll get I think the full experience of the emotional, sort of roller coaster that Palestine is. Cool. Who feels like they have a really good historical background in Palestine? Yeah, I'm kind of feeling that. I probably read in the last year 10 books on it, but at the same time, there's so much to learn. That said, I'm not going to focus much on history for this presentation because there are a lot of really good books that do a really good job with that, better than I will. And I would be happy to recommend a few of my personal, I think, favorite in terms of entertaining and unbiased, perspective on the last 100 years of the conflict, or the full 100 years of the conflict, because it's really how old it is. It's The Lemon Tree, which is it's a great read. It's a quick read. It's not too factual. So anyway, I recommend everyone read it. So, like my dad said, I was working with the International Solidarity Movement in the West Bank, and there's ISM activists in both the West Bank and Gaza, but it's very difficult to get into Gaza, and once you get in, it's a commitment. There are ISM activists who've been there for years. All of them lived through the Castlight operation last year. I haven't quite been ready to make that commitment yet. So this is I just sort of want to put it, the bit of history I'm going to do is like to sort of put it in this framework of, this is a conflict that began around the turn of the century with the beginning of the Zionist movement, and or the really sort of international Zionist movement, to move people to Palestine and to create a Jewish homeland in Israel, or in Palestine, excuse me. And you can see a few different dates here. I won't explain this too much, but suffice to say that basically during the time from '67, the last sort of major war, and the last time that the barriers really changed when Israel occupied the West Bank, and 2009, this was not a sudden transition from this to this in terms of Palestinian land. This has been a gradual sort of creeping establishment of settlements all over the West Bank, and so this is a UN map of the West Bank. And you can't really see it too well right now.
Excuse me?
But it's a.
Are you going to talk at all about the pre-48 independence?
I'm not going to talk any more about
Can
it.
I mention one little?
But a leader, a leader in the UK. I can't remember exactly what his position was, but the quote was, "We haven't made any agreements with the Palestinians that we do not intend to break, at least in the letter of the agreement." That's in another great book I can recommend at the end.
Some people have
Okay, I'll talk louder. Great. So the International Solidarity Movement works all over the West Bank and Gaza, mostly focused. I went with the idea of focusing on sort of one particular place to really gain understanding of that. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that wasn't quite possible because there's a lot to do around the West Bank, and there's a small number of ISM activists. So while I focused mostly in East Jerusalem and Bethlehem, I also ended up sort of all over the West Bank, which is not very big. To get to Nablus, which is up here, from East Jerusalem or Ramallah, it's about 2.5 hours. And then to get to Hebron down here, it's about an hour. Add in checkpoints, and it's 5 or 6 hours. But that's the state of the occupation. So I focused accidentally, actually, on a neighborhood called Sheikh Jarrah, which is one of the flashpoints that you'll read about in the news these days. During the AIPAC, during actually the same time as Hillary Clinton was making her speech at AIPAC, the AIPAC conference, saying not only is our support for Israel rock solid, but also stop building settlements in East Jerusalem. Another settlement of 500-unit apartment building on a confiscated Palestinian hotel was okayed by the municipality.